A 10-year-old boy walked into a biker bar in Cheyenne, Wyoming, holding a crumpled photograph of his 3-year-old brother and crying so hard he could barely breathe. And when he asked 30 Iron Wolves to get his baby brother back, the bikers discovered something that turned a rescue mission into a war. Before we dive into this story, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that real heroes don't always wear badges, that sometimes they wear leather vests, ride Harleys, and fight corrupt systems, hit that subscribe button. Now, to the big question, will he get his little brother back? The Wyoming wind hit different after dark, cold, sharp, the kind that cut through jackets and skin and settled somewhere in your bones. It rolled off the Laramie Range and swept through Cheyenne like it owned the place, rattling the chain-link fence surrounding the Iron Wolves MC clubhouse on the edge of town. Inside, 30 bikers filled the common room with the smell of leather, motor oil, and the kind of laughter that comes from men who've survived things most Americans only read about. Pool balls cracked. A jukebox played Lynyrd Skynyrd. Someone argued about the Broncos' playoff chances while someone else poured whiskey into glasses that had seen better decades. Frank Doe sat at the bar, nursing his second drink of the night, watching his brothers unwind. 44 years old. President of the Iron Wolves for 6 years. Former Army Ranger, 2 tours in Afghanistan, a Bronze Star he kept in a drawer, and nightmares he'd mostly learned to live with. Broad shoulders, scarred knuckles, eyes that had seen IEDs tear through Humvees and still found ways to smile when his daughter asked for bedtime stories. This was his family, his peace. The men around him had served in Fallujah, Kandahar, Mosul, places where brotherhood was forged in blood and never forgotten. They'd come home to a country that said, "Thank you for your service," and offered nothing else. So they'd built something themselves, a club, a code, a reason to keep riding. Then the door opened. Not the way bikers open doors, confident, heavy, owning the room. This was hesitant, slow, the creak of hinges under weight that didn't want to be noticed. Every head turned. A boy stood in the doorway, 10 years old, maybe 11, blonde hair matted and dirty, yellow hoodie 3 sizes too big, sleeves swallowing his hands. Jeans with holes at the knees, not the fashionable kind, the worn-through kind. Sneakers held together with duct tape. But it was his face that made the room go silent. Tear tracks cut through dirt on his cheeks. His eyes were red, swollen, the kind of crying that comes from hours, not minutes. His lip trembled. His whole body shook, not from the Wyoming cold, but from something deeper. Fear, exhaustion, desperation so raw it filled the room like smoke. In his hand, he clutched a photograph, crumpled, worn at the edges, held like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Frank set down his whiskey and stood slowly. Behind him, Cutter killed the jukebox. Brick moved toward the door, not threatening, just blocking the exit in case the kid bolted. Preacher crossed himself silently. Doc reached for the first aid kit without being asked. Frank walked toward the boy, boots heavy on the concrete floor, and stopped 5 feet away. Then he did something that surprised no one who knew him. He knelt down, one knee on the ground, putting himself at eye level with a child who'd clearly been through hell. "Hey there, son," Frank said, voice low and steady. "What's your name?" The boy swallowed hard. Keegan. Keegan. That's a strong name. I'm Frank. What are you doing out here alone?" Keegan's lip trembled harder. He looked at the bikers surrounding him, tattooed, scarred, intimidating, and instead of running, he stepped closer. Toward Frank, toward safety he'd somehow decided existed in this room, full of dangerous-looking men. He held up the photograph. A toddler, 3 years old, maybe younger, same blonde hair as Keegan, same eyes, smiling at the camera with the kind of innocent joy that hadn't learned yet how cruel the world could be. "This is Philip," Keegan whispered. "He's my little brother. He's 3. Frank took the photo gently, studied it, felt something tighten in his chest. "Where's Philip now?" Frank asked. And then Keegan said the words that changed everything. "They took him. CPS took him. They put him with strangers in Casper, and they put me in a group home here." His voice cracked. "But Philip doesn't understand. He's just a baby. He cries for me every night. I know he does. And I can't. He broke. Sobs tore through his small body. He collapsed forward, and Frank caught him instinctively, holding a child he'd never met like he was his own son. "Easy, son. Easy. I got you." Cutter stepped closer, voice quiet. "Frank, what's the situation?" Frank looked up, Keegan still crying into his shoulder. "Kid says CPS separated him from his baby brother. Where's their mom?" Keegan answered, muffled against Frank's vest. "Hospital. She took too many pills. The doctors say she might not wake up. Overdose." Frank had seen it before, the opioid crisis that tore through small-town America like a wildfire, leaving orphans in its wake. Mothers who'd started with prescriptions after car accidents or surgeries and ended up chasing something that would eventually kill them. "Your dad?" Preacher asked gently. "Don't have one. Never did." Keegan pulled back, wiping his face with his sleeve. "It was just us, me and Philip and Mom, and I took care of him. I always took care of him. I made his bottles, I changed his diapers, I sang him to sleep when Mom couldn't." The room felt heavier. 30 veterans men who'd seen combat, who'd buried brothers, who'd come home with wounds visible and invisible, stood listening to a 10-year-old describe raising his baby brother because their mother couldn't. "How'd you end up here?" Frank asked. "I ran away. From the group home. 3 nights ago." Keegan's voice steadied, something harder underneath the tears. "They said I'd probably never see Philip again. Said he was going to be adopted by some family in Casper, but I can't let that happen. He needs me. I'm his brother. I'm all he has." "So you came looking for us?" Keegan nodded. "I heard kids talking. At the group home. They said bikers help people sometimes. Kids like us. They said you're not like the cops or the social workers. They said you actually do something." Frank felt the weight of that statement settle on his shoulders. The Iron Wolves had a reputation built over years of escorting abuse survivors, standing guard at funerals, protecting witnesses too scared to trust police. They'd become the thing Frank had always wanted to be in Afghanistan, protectors of the innocent. But this was different. This was the system itself. CPS, courts, judges, the kind of enemy you couldn't fight with fists or numbers. "Keegan," Frank said slowly, "I need you to understand something. We're not lawyers. We're not social workers. We can't just walk into CPS and demand they give you your brother back." "I know," Keegan whispered. "But will you try? Please." He held up the photograph again. Philip's face, 3 years old, innocent, alone. "I don't have any money, I don't have anything, but I'll do whatever you want. Clean bikes, sweep floors, anything. Just please, please help me get my brother back." Frank looked at that photograph. Looked at Keegan, a child who'd walked through the Wyoming night alone, who'd run from a group home and found strangers in a bar because the adults who were supposed to protect him had failed. He thought about his own kids safe at home with Maggie, never wondering if they'd be separated, never crying themselves to sleep in a stranger's house. He thought about Afghanistan, about children in villages who'd lost everything to systems that didn't care about them. And he made a decision. Brick, lock the doors. Nobody in or out. Done. Cutter, I need everything you can find on CPS placements in Wyoming, specifically a foster family in Casper, and find out who the caseworker was. On it. Preacher, call Martinez. Tell him we need a family lawyer. Tonight. Copy. Doc, check this kid over. Food, water, medical attention, whatever he needs. Got him. Frank stood and looked at his brothers. 30 men who'd sworn to protect the vulnerable when America's systems failed. "Iron wolves," Frank said, voice carrying the authority of a man who'd led soldiers through firefights and brought them home alive. "We've got a mission. There's a 3-year-old boy in Casper who's been separated from his brother by a system that doesn't give a damn about family. We're gonna find out why, and we're gonna fix it." He looked down at Keegan. "You asked if we'd get your brother back. Here's my answer. We're gonna do everything in our power to make that happen. But I need you to trust us. Can you do that?" Keegan stared at him, at this stranger in leather, who knelt down to talk to him, who didn't dismiss him, who treated him like he mattered. "Yes, sir," Keegan whispered. Frank extended his hand. "Then welcome to the Iron Wolves. Son, your family now." Keegan took his hand, shook it, and for the first time in 3 days stopped crying. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled, but inside the clubhouse something stronger was building. Brotherhood, purpose, the kind of mission that doesn't end until the innocent are safe. And 30 bikers prepared to go to war against a system that had forgotten what family meant. The clubhouse transformed into a war room within 30 minutes. Pool tables became planning stations, the jukebox stayed silent, and 30 veterans who'd spent years learning to read intelligence reports now turned those skills toward a different kind of enemy. Cutter 36, former Army intelligence, the kind of man who could find anyone anywhere if you gave him a laptop and Wi-Fi, set up his equipment in the corner. 3 monitors glowed in the dim light. His fingers flew across keyboards like he was back in Kandahar, tracking insurgent movements instead of bureaucratic paper trails. "Got something," Cutter said, voice tight. Caseworker who handled Keegan and Philip's case is named Diane Mercer. 12 years with Wyoming CPS, based out of Cheyenne, but handles placements across the state. Frank leaned over his shoulder. "What else?" "That's where it gets interesting." Cutter pulled up a spreadsheet. In the last 18 months, Diane Mercer has placed 23 children with foster families. Normal caseload would be maybe 8 to 10 placements per year. She's running at triple the rate. Brick 6'4", former Marine Corps scout sniper, built like a refrigerator with fists cracked his knuckles. That sounds like someone trying to move product. Gets worse. Cutter highlighted a column. 14 of those 23 placements went to the same 6 families. And look at this, the Henderson family in Casper has received 6 children in 18 months, all through Diane Mercer. Preacher, the club's chaplain, former Navy corpsman, a man who'd held dying Marines in Fallujah and still believed in God, crossed himself. That's not foster care. That's a pipeline. Frank turned to look at Keegan, who sat wrapped in a blanket near the fireplace, eating the first hot meal he'd had in 3 days. Doc, former Green Beret medic, knelt beside him, checking for injuries with gentle hands. "The Hendersons," Frank said quietly. "That's where Philip is?" Cutter nodded. "According to the placement records I could access, 3-year-old male, blonde hair, blue eyes, healthy, placed with Gerald and Linda Henderson in Casper 4 days ago." 4 days? Frank's jaw tightened. "That's fast. Way too fast for proper vetting." "Unless you're not vetting at all," Cutter replied. "Unless you're just moving kids to people who pay." The room went cold. Every man there understood what Cutter was implying. The foster care system in America was supposed to protect children. But like any system with money flowing through it, corruption found cracks. And when those cracks involved children, healthy, adoptable children like Philip, the implications turned Frank's stomach. His phone buzzed. Text from Maggie. "Kids are in bed. Everything okay?" Frank typed back. "Situation at the clubhouse. Might be late. Love you." Then he made the call he'd been dreading. "Mags, I need you to come down here and bring your foster certification paperwork." Maggie Doe arrived 45 minutes later, 42, auburn hair, the kind of woman who'd married a soldier knowing he might not come back and loved him anyway. She'd been a licensed foster parent for 3 years, taking in emergency placements when CPS needed help. She knew the system. She knew its failures. When she saw Keegan, her maternal instincts kicked in immediately. She sat beside him, spoke softly, learned his story. And when she heard about Philip, 3 years old, alone, placed with strangers, while his brother searched for help, her expression hardened. "I can file for emergency kinship placement," Maggie said. "It's a long shot without biological connection, but if we can prove the current placement is unsafe—" "We're working on that," Frank said. "How long do we have?" Cutter answered. "If Diane Mercer follows her usual pattern, she'll push for expedited adoption within 30 days. Makes it permanent. Makes it profitable." "Profitable?" Maggie's voice sharpened. "We think there's a kickback system," Frank explained. "Caseworker places kids with specific families. Families pay for the referrals. Everyone wins except the children." Maggie stood, jaw set. "Then we have less than 30 days to prove it. And to get Philip out." Frank looked at his brothers. "Cutter, keep digging. Financial records, communication patterns, anything that connects Mercer to payments. Brick, I want you to assemble a team. We're riding to Casper tomorrow not to fight, but to observe. I need eyes on that Henderson property." "What are we looking for?" Brick asked. "Anything that proves those kids aren't safe. Neglect, abuse, evidence we can take to a judge." Preacher stepped forward. "And the legal angle?" "Martinez is on his way, best family lawyer in Wyoming. If there's a legal path to getting Philip back, he'll find it." Frank knelt beside Keegan one more time. The boy had stopped eating, listening to every word with wide eyes. "Keegan, I need you to understand something. What we're doing, it's not going to be fast. The system moves slow, and the people we're fighting know how to use that. But I promise you, we're not giving up. Not until Philip is back with you." Keegan's voice came small. "What if they adopt him before you can stop it?" Frank placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll fight the adoption, and if that fails, we'll keep fighting until we find another way. Because that's what family does." "I'm not your family," Keegan whispered. Frank smiled, the first real smile he'd managed all night. "You walked into my clubhouse and asked for help. That makes you family. And iron wolves don't abandon family." Outside, the Wyoming night pressed against the windows. Somewhere in Casper, a 3-year-old boy slept in a stranger's house, crying for a brother who wasn't there. But 30 bikers had just declared war on the system that separated them. And the iron wolves always finished what they started. Cutter worked through the night, fueled by coffee and the kind of cold fury that came from seeing children treated like commodities. By dawn, he had enough to make every man in the clubhouse sick. "The Hendersons aren't foster parents," Cutter announced, voice flat. "They're farmers. And I don't mean crops." Frank stood over his shoulder, staring at the documents spread across the monitors. Bank statements, property records, social media posts that told a story the Hendersons probably thought was hidden. "Explain," Frank said. "Gerald Henderson worked construction until 2019. Then he got injured. Workers' comp ran out. They were about to lose their house." Cutter pulled up a timeline. Then suddenly, in 2020, they became foster parents. First placement through Diane Mercer, and look at their finances after that. The numbers were damning. Before fostering, overdrafts, missed payments, debt collection notices. After fostering, new truck, paid-off mortgage, regular deposits that didn't match any legitimate income. "They're getting paid per kid," Brick growled. "More than that." Cutter highlighted a series of transfers. "These payments are coming from somewhere outside the normal foster care system, separate account, untraceable unless you know where to look." Preacher leaned in. "What kind of money are we talking?" "Conservative estimate, 10 to 15,000 per child. Cash, plus the regular foster care stipend from the state." Frank felt his hands curl into fists. Someone's paying them to take specific children. Gets worse. Cutter pulled up photos, social media screenshots from Linda Henderson's Facebook. Look at these kids. 6 children in 18 months. All healthy, all young, all with the same hollow look in their eyes that Frank had seen in villages in Afghanistan where children learned early that adults couldn't be trusted. They look neglected, Doc said quietly, underfed. Those aren't happy kids. Because they're not family to the Hendersons, Cutter replied. They're inventory. Frank turned away from the screen, needing a moment to process. He walked to the window and stared out at the parking lot, where Harleys sat in neat rows like soldiers waiting for orders. His country had sent him to war twice. He'd believed in the mission, protecting the innocent, fighting evil, defending those who couldn't defend themselves. He'd come home and tried to keep that mission alive through the club. But this, a system designed to protect children being weaponized against them? Caseworkers and foster parents conspiring to traffic kids for profit while judges rubber-stamped paperwork? This was the enemy he'd trained his whole life to fight. "Where does Diane Mercer fit in?" Frank asked without turning around. Cutter answered, "She's the broker. Finds the kids, processes the placements, covers the paperwork. The Hendersons and 5 other families are her clients. And here's the connection. Gerald Henderson's brother, Ray, did time for fraud. Guess who processed his early release recommendation? Diane Mercer's husband. He works for the state parole board. Family business," Brick spat. "Criminal enterprise," Preacher corrected. "Using children as currency." Frank turned back to face his brothers. "Can we prove it? In court?" Cutter hesitated. "Not yet. Everything I have is circumstantial. We need direct evidence, testimony, recordings, documentation of actual payments tied to specific placements. Then we get it." Frank walked to the center of the room. 20 Iron Wolves ride to Casper today, not to fight, not to confront, to observe and document. "And if we find Philip being neglected?" Brick asked. "Then we document that too. Every bruise, every missed meal, every sign that those people aren't fit to raise a goldfish, let alone a 3-year-old. Doc stepped forward. "What about Keegan?" Frank looked toward the back room, where the boy had finally fallen asleep, exhausted beyond words. "He stays here, with Maggie, safe. And if Diane Mercer finds out we're investigating?" Frank's expression went cold, the look his soldiers had learned to fear in Afghanistan, the one that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Then she learns what happens when you mess with children in Iron Wolves territory." By noon, 20 motorcycles rolled out of Cheyenne toward Casper, engines thundering, American flags snapping in the Wyoming wind. Somewhere in that city, a 3-year-old boy waited for rescue. And the Iron Wolves were coming. The ride from Cheyenne to Casper took just under 3 hours, 180 miles of I-25, cutting through the heart of Wyoming, past Wheatland and Douglas, through high plains where antelope grazed and the sky stretched forever. 20 Harleys rode in diamond formation, military precision learned from years of veteran funeral escorts. Frank at the point, Brick and Preacher flanking, Cutter in the middle with his laptop in his saddlebag, Doc bringing up the rear with a medical kit that could handle anything from scraped knees to gunshot wounds. They didn't speak, didn't need to. Every man knew the mission. Observe, document. Don't engage unless engaged. But underneath the discipline, anger simmered. These were men who'd lost friends in Fallujah and Kandahar, who'd come home to find the country they'd defended had forgotten them. They'd built the Iron Wolves as a refuge, a place where brotherhood meant something, where protecting the vulnerable wasn't just a slogan. And now they were riding toward a house where a 3-year-old boy was being held by people who saw him as a paycheck. The Henderson property sat on the outskirts of Casper, a ranch-style house on 2 acres of land that had probably been nice once but had gone to seed. Peeling paint, overgrown lawn, a fence with gaps big enough for a child to slip through or fall through. Brick parked his bike on a ridge overlooking the property, binoculars in hand. 3 vehicles, looks like both adults are home. I count 4 kids in the backyard. Ages? Frank asked. Hard to tell from here. Young, maybe 3 to 7. Philip would be the youngest. Can't confirm visual yet. Want me to get closer? Frank shook his head. Not yet. We watch. We wait. We document. For the next 6 hours, the Iron Wolves rotated observation shifts. Cutter set up a telephoto camera and captured hundreds of images. What they showed painted a grim picture. The children played in the backyard, but played was generous. They sat in dirt, listless, while Gerald Henderson drank beer on the porch and scrolled his phone. Linda Henderson appeared occasionally to yell at the kids, never to comfort them. Lunch never came, neither did snacks. The children drank from a garden hose. At 3 p.m., Frank spotted him. A small figure, blonde hair, blue eyes, wearing a diaper that sagged like it hadn't been changed in hours. He sat apart from the other children, alone, rocking back and forth the way traumatized kids do when they've learned that crying doesn't bring help. Philip, Frank's heart clenched. That was Keegan's baby brother, 3 years old, alone, neglected, waiting for someone to rescue him. I see him, Brick said quietly. Poor kid. Document everything, Frank ordered, voice tight. Every detail. The diaper, the isolation, the lack of food, all of it. By evening, they had enough photos to fill a courtroom gallery. But photos weren't proof of the corruption, just proof of neglect. We need more, Cutter said, as they regrouped at a truck stop outside Casper. The neglect is bad, but CPS could argue it's a one-time thing. We need to connect the Hendersons to Diane Mercer's payments, prove the pattern. How? Preacher asked. We need someone on the inside, someone who's seen the transactions, someone willing to talk. Frank thought about it. The Hendersons were unlikely to confess. Diane Mercer was protected by the system. But every conspiracy had weak links. The brother, Frank said suddenly, Ray Henderson, did time for fraud, probably knows how the operation works, and probably hates his brother for getting a sweet deal while he went to prison, Cutter added. Find him. Tomorrow, we make contact. As the sun set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Frank of desert sunsets in Afghanistan, he made a silent promise to the little boy he'd seen through binoculars. Hold on, Philip. We're coming. The ride back to Cheyenne was quiet, but inside every biker's chest the same fire burned. Justice was coming for Diane Mercer and the Hendersons. They just didn't know it yet. The first sign of trouble came at 7:32 a.m., 2 days after the Casper reconnaissance. Frank was pouring coffee when his phone rang. Martinez, the lawyer. We have a problem, Martinez said without preamble. Diane Mercer just filed a motion to accelerate Philip's adoption, hearing scheduled for Friday. That's 3 days from now. Frank's blood ran cold. She knows we're investigating. Probably. Someone must have spotted your crew in Casper, or she has contacts who tipped her off. Can you fight the motion? I can try, but here's the issue. Maggie's emergency kinship petition is still pending. Without biological connection, we're arguing on humanitarian grounds. And judges in family court tend to favor permanent placement over temporary solutions. So they're going to give Philip to the Hendersons permanently, based on 4 days of fostering? If Mercer gets her way, yes. And once that adoption is finalized, it's nearly impossible to reverse. Frank ended the call and stood in the clubhouse kitchen, coffee growing cold in his hand. 3 days. They had 3 days to prove corruption that had been operating for years, to convince a judge that the system had failed, to rescue a 3-year-old from people who saw him as property. Then his phone rang again. Different number. Unknown. Frank Doe. A woman's voice. Official. Cold. Who's asking? This is Detective Sarah Wheeler, Cheyenne Police Department. I'm calling about a missing child report. Keegan Miller, age 10, ran away from the Sunrise Group home 5 days ago. We have reason to believe he's at your location. Frank's jaw tightened. And if he is, then I'm required to return him to state custody, unless you have legal authority to house him. His caseworker placed him in a group home where he wasn't safe. His brother was taken and placed with strangers who are neglecting him. The system failed this kid, Detective. I understand your concern, Mr. Doe, but the law is clear. If you're harboring a ward of the state without authorization, that's custodial interference, possibly kidnapping. We've filed for emergency kinship placement, which hasn't been approved yet. Wheeler's voice softened slightly. Look, I'm not trying to be the bad guy here, but if you don't cooperate, I have to come with officers and remove the child. That gets ugly for everyone. Frank thought fast. Give me 24 hours. We have a hearing Friday. If our petition is approved, this becomes moot. If not, I'll bring Keegan in myself. Silence on the line. Then 24 hours. After that, I'm coming. And Mr. Doe? For what it's worth, I looked into the Henderson placement. Something doesn't smell right. But I can't prove anything. We're working on that. Work faster. She hung up. Frank found Keegan in the back room, playing cards with Doc, trying to pretend he wasn't terrified. The boy had heard the phone call. His face was pale. They're coming for me, aren't they? Frank knelt beside him. Not if I can help it. But Philip, we're going to save him. Both of you, I promise. How? Keegan's voice cracked. The system always wins. That's what the other kids at the group home said. Once you're in, you're stuck. They decide everything. We don't matter. Frank placed both hands on Keegan's shoulders and looked him dead in the eye. Listen to me. I've fought enemies in Afghanistan who had more weapons, more soldiers, more power than we did. And you know what? We won. Not because we were stronger, but because we never gave up. Because we fought for something worth fighting for. What did you fight for? Freedom, safety, the right of innocent people to live without fear. Frank squeezed his shoulders gently. That's what we're fighting for now. For you, for Philip. And I don't care how big the system is. We're not backing down. Keegan stared at him, wanting to believe, afraid to hope. Okay, he whispered finally. Okay. That night, as the clubhouse prepared for the battle ahead, Frank called an emergency meeting. We have 72 hours, he announced. After that, the judge rules on Philip's adoption and potentially takes Keegan into custody. We need evidence, hard evidence. Something that proves Diane Mercer is corrupt and the Henderson placement is dangerous. I found Ray Henderson, Cutter reported. He's living in a trailer park outside Laramie. Hours money to half the town. He might talk if we offer the right incentive. Then we offer it. Brick, you and Preacher make contact tomorrow. Whatever he wants, money, protection, revenge on his brother, make it happen. And if he won't talk? Frank's expression hardened. Then we find another way, because I made a promise to that boy, and iron wolves keep their promises. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled. Inside, 30 bikers prepared for the fight of their lives. Detective Wheeler arrived at 8 a.m. the next morning with 2 patrol officers and an apologetic expression. I'm sorry, Mr. Doe, she said, standing at the clubhouse gate. 24 hours are up. I need to take Keegan into custody. Frank stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Behind him, 12 iron wolves formed a line, not aggressive, not threatening, just present. A wall of leather and loyalty that said this wasn't going to be easy. We filed an emergency motion this morning, Frank said. Maggie's kinship petition is being heard at 2 p.m. Today instead of Friday. Martinez pulled some strings. Wheeler's eyebrows rose. That's fast. We have new evidence. Evidence that the Henderson placement is unsafe and that the caseworker who made it is corrupt. What kind of evidence? Before Frank could answer, a car pulled into the parking lot. Maggie's SUV. She stepped out carrying a folder thick with documents and walked past the police officers like they were furniture. Detective Wheeler? Maggie extended her hand. I'm Margaret Doe, licensed foster parent. I filed for emergency kinship placement for both Keegan and Philip Miller. Given the evidence of neglect at the current placement and the suspected corruption in the placement process, I'm requesting that Keegan remain in our care pending this afternoon's hearing. Wheeler took the folder, flipped through it. Photos of Philip in a sagging diaper, images of the Henderson property, financial records. Cutter had traced payments that didn't match any legitimate source. A preliminary statement from Ray Henderson, obtained by Brick and Preacher at 3 a.m., confirming that his brother received cash payments for taking specific children. Jesus, Wheeler muttered, this is enough to warrant an investigation, Maggie finished, and enough to keep Keegan safe until a judge can review it. Wheeler looked at the documents, then at the bikers standing behind Frank, then at the clubhouse, where a 10-year-old boy was watching through the window with terror in his eyes. She made a decision. I'll escort you to the courthouse, Wheeler said, all of you. But if this hearing doesn't go your way, I'm required to follow the judge's ruling. Understood? Understood, Frank said. An hour later, the Iron Wolves rode through downtown Cheyenne, in formation not as outlaws, but as escorts. Maggie's SUV in the center, Keegan in the back seat, 30 motorcycles surrounding them like a protective shell. People stopped on sidewalks to watch. Some took photos. A local news van appeared, following at a distance. The Laramie County Courthouse loomed ahead, stone and glass, American flag flying, the scales of justice carved above the entrance. Inside that building, a judge would decide whether Keegan stayed with the Iron Wolves or returned to a system that had already failed him, whether Philip remained with neglectful strangers or got a chance at a real family. Frank parked his bike and looked at his brothers. Whatever happens in there, we stand together. We don't threaten, we don't intimidate, we let the evidence speak. And if the evidence isn't enough? Brick asked. Frank's jaw tightened. Then we find another way. But we're not losing those boys. Not today. Not ever. They walked into the courthouse together, bikers and lawyers, veterans and civilians, a family built not by blood, but by choice. And Keegan, 10 years old, terrified beyond words, walked between them, wearing a small Iron Wolves patch that Maggie had sewn onto his jacket that morning. Because family protects its own, and the Iron Wolves were about to prove it. The hearing began at 2:17 p.m. in Courtroom 3, Judge Helen Blackwood presiding. Diane Mercer sat at the prosecution table with the Hendersons' lawyer, looking confident. She'd done this before. Dozens of times. The system was her ally. Judges trusted her recommendations. Paperwork protected her. But she hadn't counted on the Iron Wolves. Martinez presented the evidence methodically. Photos, financial records, Ray Henderson's statement. Each piece landed like a hammer blow. The Hendersons' lawyer objected repeatedly, but Judge Blackwood overruled every time, her expression growing darker with each revelation. Your Honor, Diane Mercer finally interjected, these allegations are baseless. The Iron Wolves MC has a vested interest in discrediting our department. They've essentially kidnapped Keegan Miller, and now they're trying to justify it with fabricated evidence. Martinez smiled. If the evidence is fabricated, Miss Mercer, perhaps you can explain these bank deposits? He displayed the financial records on the courtroom screen. $8,000 transferred to the Henderson family 3 days after each placement, all from an account registered to, he paused dramatically, your husband's consulting firm. The courtroom murmured. Diane Mercer's face went white. That's circumstantial, is it? Martinez pulled out his phone. Because we have testimony from Ray Henderson, Gerald Henderson's brother, stating that these payments were standard practice. Would you like me to play the recording? Judge Blackwood held up her hand. That won't be necessary yet, but I'm ordering a full investigation into these financial records. In the meantime, I'm placing a temporary hold on the Henderson adoption pending review. Mercer stood desperate now. Your Honor, removing Philip from a stable placement could traumatize him further. I think he's already traumatized enough, Keegan said. The entire courtroom turned. The boy had stood up from his seat beside Frank, small voice carrying with surprising strength. Philip cries every night. I know because I raised him. I made his bottles. I sang him to sleep. And when Mom couldn't take care of us, I did. Tears streamed down his face. He doesn't know those people. He knows me. I'm his brother. And he needs me. Judge Blackwood's expression softened. Son, I understand. No, you don't. Keegan reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made Frank's heart stop. A phone. Old, cracked, held together with tape. The phone his real father had given him before disappearing years ago. I recorded things, Keegan said, voice shaking. When Mom was sick, when CPS came, when Miss Mercer told Mom that if she signed papers giving up her rights, the drug charges would go away. She promised Mom we'd stay together. She lied. He held up the phone. It's all on here. Everything. The courtroom erupted. Diane Mercer's lawyer demanded the phone be excluded. Martinez argued for immediate admission. Judge Blackwood slammed her gavel and ordered silence. Young man, she said gently, may I see that phone? Keegan walked forward, small and terrified but determined. He handed the phone to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Blackwood plugged it into the courtroom's audio system and pressed play. Diane Mercer's voice filled the room. Look, Sarah, I know it's hard, but if you sign these papers, I can make the possession charges disappear. And your boys will be placed with good families. Separately, yes, but that's better for them. Trust me. A woman's voice, Keegan's mother, weak and confused. But they need each other. Keegan takes care of Philip. Keegan will adjust. They all do. Just sign here. The recording ended. The courtroom was silent. Judge Blackwood looked at Diane Mercer with an expression that could freeze hell. Bailiff, she said quietly, please detain Miss Mercer pending investigation for fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. Diane Mercer screamed protests as officers handcuffed her. The Hendersons' lawyer gathered his papers and fled. And Keegan stood in the middle of the courtroom, phone still in his hand, crying not from fear but from relief. Frank walked to him, knelt down, and pulled him into a hug. You did it, son. You saved your brother. Is Philip coming home? Judge Blackwood answered. Emergency custody is hereby granted to Margaret and Frank Doe for both Keegan and Philip Miller. Philip will be retrieved from the Henderson residence immediately and placed in your care. The Iron Wolves erupted in cheers. Maggie burst into tears. And Keegan, 10 years old, who'd walked into a biker bar with nothing but a photograph and a desperate prayer, finally let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, everything would be okay. The ride to Casper that evening felt different than before. This time, they weren't reconnaissance. They weren't hiding. They were coming with a court order and the full weight of Wyoming law behind them. 20 Iron Wolves, 2 patrol cars, a CPS supervisor who wasn't Diane Mercer and who looked appropriately horrified by what she'd learned. The Hendersons knew they were coming. Gerald stood on the porch with his arms crossed, trying to look tough. Linda hovered in the doorway, face pale. You can't just take him, Gerald shouted as the convoy pulled up. We have rights. Detective Wheeler stepped forward with the court order. Actually, Mr. Henderson, we can. And we're also placing all children in your care under protective custody, pending investigation into fraud and child neglect. You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the Miranda warning was drowned out by Frank's boots on the porch steps. "Where's Philip?" Gerald's tough facade cracked. "Living room, with the others." Frank walked inside. The house smelled like cigarettes and neglect. Dishes piled in the sink, stains on the carpet, evidence of a home where children were present but never prioritized. 4 kids sat on a couch, watching cartoons with vacant eyes, and in the corner, sitting alone on the floor, was Philip. 3 years old, blonde hair dirty and matted, diaper sagging, eyes red from crying. The moment Philip saw Frank a stranger in leather, he started to cry harder, curling into himself. But then another voice came from behind. "Philip, Philip, it's me. It's Kiji." Frank stepped aside as Keegan rushed past him, dropping to his knees beside his baby brother. Philip's head snapped up, his eyes went wide. And then, "Kiji!" The toddler launched himself into his brother's arms, screaming the only name that mattered, clutching Keegan like he'd never let go. "I got you," Keegan sobbed, holding him tight. "I got you. I'm here. I'm never leaving again. Never." Behind them, hardened bikers who'd survived firefights and IEDs turned away to hide tears. Doc pretended to check his medical kit. Brick suddenly found the ceiling very interesting. Preacher crossed himself and whispered a prayer of thanks. Frank knelt beside the brothers, 2 boys the system had tried to separate, reunited through courage and brotherhood and a 10-year-old's refusal to give up. "Let's go home," Frank said quietly. Keegan looked up at him, Philip still clutching his neck. "Home? Yeah, son. Home." The ride back to Cheyenne was the longest 3 hours of Frank's life, and the best. Philip fell asleep in Keegan's arms in Maggie's SUV, exhausted but safe. Keegan held him the entire way, watching his baby brother breathe like he couldn't believe it was real. At the clubhouse, the Iron Wolves had prepared. Not a party, something quieter, food, warmth, a crib borrowed from a brother whose kids had outgrown it, clothes that actually fit, toys Philip could play with instead of dirt and neglect. When Maggie carried Philip inside and he woke up to see a room full of bikers smiling at him, he didn't cry. He smiled back. Ma," he asked, looking at Maggie. Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "Not yet, sweet boy. But maybe someday." Keegan stood in the doorway, watching his brother be welcomed by 30 veterans who dropped everything to save him. Frank walked over. "How you doing?" "I keep thinking I'm gonna wake up," Keegan admitted, "that this is a dream, and I'm still in that group home." "It's not a dream. You're safe. Philip's safe, and you're staying with us." "For how long?" Frank looked at Maggie, who nodded through her tears. "For as long as you want. Forever, if that's what you choose." Keegan's breath caught. "Forever? We've already started the paperwork. Adoption proceedings. Both of you, if you want it." For a long moment, Keegan didn't respond. Then he hugged Frank hard, desperate. The kind of hug that says, "I've been waiting my whole life for someone to keep a promise." "Thank you," Keegan whispered. "Thank you for getting my brother back." Frank held him tight and made one more promise, silent, unspoken, but absolute. He'd never let anyone separate these boys again. 3 months later, the Wyoming sun hung high over Cheyenne as the Iron Wolves gathered for a ceremony unlike any they'd held before. The Hendersons were in custody, awaiting trial for fraud, neglect, and conspiracy. Diane Mercer had pleaded guilty to 18 counts of corruption and was serving 5 years in state prison. Her husband's consulting firm had been dissolved. The 6 foster families who'd participated in her scheme were all under investigation. And Keegan and Philip Miller, officially Keegan and Philip Doe as of 10:47 a.m., that morning stood in the clubhouse yard wearing matching Iron Wolves t-shirts that Maggie had custom-made. The adoption had been finalized in Judge Blackwood's courtroom, the same room where Keegan had played the recording that brought down a corrupt system. The judge had smiled when she signed the papers, a rare expression from a woman known for her stone-faced demeanor. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Doe," she'd said. "You now have 2 sons. Take care of them." Frank had promised they would. Now, in the clubhouse yard, 30 bikers formed a circle around the boys. Veterans, brothers, men who'd survived wars and found peace in loyalty and chrome. Frank stepped into the center, holding 2 small leather vests. "Keegan," he said, voice carrying across the silent yard. "3 months ago, you walked into this clubhouse with nothing but a photograph and a desperate hope. You asked us to get your brother back. And we did, but not alone. You saved him. Your courage, your refusal to give up. That recording you kept for months, waiting for the right moment." He held up the first vest, child-sized black leather, with a patch that read Keegan, Lionheart Doe, and beneath it, Iron Wolves Family. "This is yours. Earned, not given, because you fought for your family when no one else would." Keegan stepped forward, tears streaming, and let Frank place the vest on his shoulders. It fit perfectly. Maggie had measured twice. Then Frank knelt beside Philip, now 4 years old, healthy, happy, with cheeks that had filled out and eyes that sparkled instead of staring. "And you, little man," Frank said softly, "you're too young to understand all of this. But one day, when you're older, your brother will tell you the story. How he walked through the dark to find help, how he never gave up on you, how he loved you enough to fight the whole world." He placed the second vest on Philip's small shoulders. "Philip, Little Wolf Doe." Philip grinned and pointed at the patch. "Wolf, like Daddy." The yard erupted. Engines revved. Bikers cheered. Maggie sobbed into her hands while Doc pretended he wasn't crying too. Keegan knelt beside his brother and hugged him tight. "I promised I'd never leave you," he whispered. "And I didn't." "Keegi, best brother," Philip agreed solemnly. Later, after the celebration had quieted and families had gone home and the clubhouse returned to its usual rhythm, Frank found Keegan sitting on the porch, looking at the stars. "Can't sleep?" Frank asked, sitting beside him. "Just thinking." "About?" Keegan was quiet for a moment. "When I walked in here that first night, I didn't think anyone would help. The other kids at the group home said bikers were dangerous, that they'd probably hurt me or turn me away. What made you come anyway? I didn't have anywhere else to go. And I thought," Keegan paused, voice cracking, "I thought if they were really dangerous, maybe they'd be dangerous enough to actually do something. Everyone else was too scared to fight the system. But bikers don't look scared of anything." Frank smiled. "We get scared. We just don't let it stop us. Why did you help me?" "Really?" Frank looked at the stars, the same stars he'd seen in Afghanistan, the same ones that had watched him bury friends and pray for survival. "Because I became a soldier to protect innocent people. And when I came home, I realized the mission didn't end, it just changed. There are kids like you all over America. Kids the system forgot. Kids who need someone to fight for them." He placed a hand on Keegan's shoulder. "You reminded me why I started the Iron Wolves in the first place. So thank you." Keegan leaned against him the way sons lean against fathers, the way trust is built between strangers who become family. "Dad?" The word came hesitant, testing. Frank's heart swelled. "Yeah, son? I'm glad I found you. I'm glad you found us too." Inside, Maggie was singing Philip to sleep, a lullaby that echoed through the clubhouse like a promise. And on the wall, in a frame that Brick had built by hand, hung a crumpled photograph of a 3-year-old boy, the same photo Keegan had clutched when he walked through that door months ago. Beside it, a small plaque read, "Will you get my little brother back? Keegan Miller, age 10, Iron Wolf. Brother, son, Family isn't who you're born to, it's who fights for you. Outside, the Wyoming wind whispered through the pines. Inside, 2 boys slept safe for the first time in their lives, and 30 bikers, who'd sworn to protect the vulnerable, had kept their promise once again. Because that's what Iron Wolves do. They ride, they fight, and they never, ever leave family behind. If you believe that family isn't who you're born to, it's who fights for you when the whole world walks away. Like and share this story. Subscribe now for more stories of brotherhood, justice, and the kind of courage that reunites brothers and exposes corrupt systems. Also, check out the 2 videos showing on the screen right now, specially crafted for you.